Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kyle Matthews. I'm the Senior Deputy Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here today to our first professional training program on the prevention of mass atrocities, and welcome you to our beautiful, if not soggy, city of Montreal, and a vibrant, multicultural university town that Montreal is known as. I thought I'd just open up the session to basically quote Nelson Mandela, who's been in the news for the past few days, someone who has shown a leadership in human rights and actually trying to bring peace to many war-torn African countries. And the one quote that I read from him last night really reflected upon me about the purpose of today's initiative. And a quote from Nelson Mandela says, "Education is the world's most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." I think that shows today what this training program is about. It's about education. Providing new insights can actually help make the world a better place and make the promise of never again a reality. MIGS, as you might know or will know from the next few days here, is increasingly recognized internationally as Canada's most innovative and digitally active centre for the study of genocide and crime against humanity. I'm pleased to have you here today to become part of our community. And this initiative that you're seated here today would not have been possible without the support of Concordia University, our home institution. And more importantly, this initiative wouldn't have taken place if not for the dedication and hard work of MIGS staff and our interns. So first of all, a special thanks goes to our senior distinguished fellow, Romeo Dallaire, and to our director, Dr. Frank Chalk, for their support in putting this initiative forward. And a special thanks goes to my colleague, Mary Lemenche, who most of you have been in contact with for the past few weeks, if not months, who's made things happen, as well as our dedicated team of interns. Most of you have met them yet, but I'll name them: Adrian Orlowski, Alejandra Espinosa, Natalie Hitimana, Zach Pakin, and Megan Chevel. Thank you both for your dedication and efforts in making today a reality. I think part of this that you're all seeing here today is because MIGS as an institute is an enabler of informed decision making. And part of that is that as an institute, MIGS has been working, although at a scholarly research center, we've been working to actually provide scholarly research to decision makers. Part of that, for example, is we're the institutional partner of the Canadian All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Prevention of Genocide, of which Senator Dallaire is the chair. We're also a member of the International Coalition for the Response to Protect. And our institute also works with a multitude of other organizations that share our mandate, that more can be done to prevent mass atrocity crimes. We are very excited to launch the first training program of its kind in the world, and honored by your decision to become a member of the first class of professionals enrolled in what we expect to become an annual event. And it's through this initiative that MIGS as an educational institute can help work with you and build more international institutions and political will for the prevention of atrocities, can help build national capacities to respond and enforce the Genocide Convention, can help mobilize democracy, and also can help build and use new technologies in a more innovative manner. Now, there's a rationale to our program here. You know, at the start of the 21st century, it became quite apparent to us at MIGS that people are no longer waiting for their governments to lead on important issues. And this training course shows that we're not waiting for the government to actually lead, that we'll create one ourselves and create a network of people with expertise and a vast range of networks. 6 months ago, on a cold, snowy night in Montreal, we decided to actually launch this program. And as I said, the idea is that more can be done to enforce and uphold the Genocide Convention and implement the principles outlined in the 2005 World Summit Outcome Document, which is otherwise referred to as a responsibility to protect. And we also have a shared objective, is that we want to be part and assist in the growth of a global network that will render it increasingly more difficult for governments and non-state actors to commit mass murder. So as a big part of our program is focused on education, we thought about how can we do this? How can we put together a program that is going to actually be groundbreaking and unique in the world? And we figured we'd actually focus our program on understanding the problems at hand in preventing atrocities and offer insight into possible solutions. So we put together in a program key thematic themes: international law and the Genocide Convention, the responsibility to protect, will to intervene in the role of national governments, the role of journalists in preventing genocide, the role of the UN and regional organizations, and mobilizing technology for prevention. And added to this program will be actually 3 specific case studies that are highly relevant to today, which is technology in the Syria crisis, the Arab Spring, and Kenya and hate speech. Now, when we started putting together this program 6 months ago, we started reaching out to experts that our institute has actually developed relationships with over the past 5-6 years, if not longer. And we've been able to put together a group of experts, and I say world experts, from some of the top think tanks, NGOs, and post-secondary institutions in North America and abroad. We have people coming to speak to us from the Faculty of Law at McGill, people from the Global Center for the Response to Protect, the School of Journalism at Carleton University, always ranked as the best in the country, people from the UN Office for the Prevention of Genocide, from NYU, so the SecDev group, Ottawa-based group. We have also people from the Center for International Government Innovation, the Brookings Institute, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the World Policy Institute. I think just that alone reflects on the high quality of speakers that you will get to meet over the next few days. And honestly, I think when we began to put this program together, we had no idea which organizations would actually sign up to take our course. But we had some ideas, but really had no idea. And today I'm very, very pleased to announce that a truly unique nexus is being formed today. One consisting of diverse groups of experts drawn from, for example, from government agencies. We have representatives from the Canadian Border Service Agency, the Department of Justice Canada, as well as from the United States Agency for International Development. From NGOs, I can't name them all, but we have some of the top ranking organizations the world over. We have people from the Canadian International Council, the Australian Red Cross, the Nobel Women's Initiative, Médecins Sans Frontières, and Merlin UK. And we also have important actors from US-based foundations, including the Stanley Foundation and the One Earth Foundation. And we also have representatives from multilateral forums, including UN officials from UNDP and the UN High Commission for Refugees. And I know we have name tags, you get the chance to meet everyone, but we also have scholars coming from McGill University, the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the University of Illinois in Chicago, Harvard, University of Toronto, and Yale. So we have a very wide cross-section of people. Now we expect a couple of important outcomes following from this 3-day training program. Among you, we expect a deeper understanding of the international legal and political architecture designed to prevent and interdict mass atrocity crimes. We also hope that it'll offer insights into new methods for mobilizing leadership for genocide prevention within national governments and in journalism. And third, informed by expert case studies and analysis, we hope a greater appreciation of the significance of the current crisis in the Middle East, the fight against hate speech in Kenya, and the rising importance of new digital technologies. I just have to say digital technologies, for those of you that are able to get online, we're going to have our intern team is going to be live tweeting the training, so to curate some of the top comments made both by you in questions and by our speakers. And if you are on Twitter, you can use hashtag MIGS 2013 to either look up the comments after or to join the discussion digitally. Now, for a final conclusion, I just want to say that MIGS as an institute is positioning itself as a hub, both as an institution and a digital platform that unites key players in society who have a role in the prevention and interdiction of mass atrocity crimes. We encourage you to help MIGS foster its growing network of specialists dedicated to preventing mass atrocities and contributing from your experiences to our growing list of important lessons learned. In the future, this initiative, which I said is going to be an annual program, is going to combine with new initiatives that we've launched or are planning to launch, including setting up a digital mass atrocity prevention lab to study how social media can be used to stop or interdict mass atrocity crimes or to combat hate online, as well as an initiative we're forming with the Aegis Trust in London to form a global democratic alliance to protect civilians, which would be uniting parliamentarians from key democracies across the globe and actually supporting them in developing new leaders in democratic institutions. So with not much more to say, I just want to say I hope you'll find this to be a collegial learning space, a space designed to foster dialogue between persons like you, rising professionals, interested in advancing their knowledge and skills, and expert teacher practitioners selected by MIGS as the very best in their fields. We look forward to getting to know each one of you over the next few days in Montreal and to learning from you now and in the future. And with further ado, I would like to pass the floor to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Frank Chalk, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
This is very easy because our speaker needs no introduction. But very briefly, Senator Romeo Dallaire came to work with MIGS. When we were first starting the Will to Intervene project, he helped us to design it and to implement it and became a co-author of the study which we accomplished with a lot of help from all of his insights and experiences in the field. He has gone from the depths of despair over the very problem that brings us here today. The paralysis, maybe we should call it analysis paralysis, which gripped the White House together with the major Western capitals and others in Africa at the time of the Rwandan genocide, and yet did everything possible that he could do to save lives and succeeded in saving many lives in Rwanda as commander of the United Nations assistance mission there. To rise again like a phoenix, to fight another day, starting as a fellow at the Kennedy Center and then moving to the Senate of Canada in Ottawa, where he has been an enormous source of inspiration and of action, moving a government that is increasingly reluctant to engage in what we used to call humanitarian intervention, but now has a much broader set of requirements, to at least attempt to justify policies of inaction and sometimes of actual action, as in the case of Libya, where the government did act, and Afghanistan, where it did act, always insisting that Canada's tradition and reputation should be continued into the future, and that Canada should live up to the progress that it made over the many decades since the United Nations was organized. So it's a privilege and an enormous pleasure to bring General Dallaire to you this morning and to allow him to share some of his insights. I give you Senator General Romeo Dallaire.
Thank you, Professor Chalk, and colleagues and friends, friends from way back. I know Professor Thompson here, and others who have been engaged in this extraordinary dimension of human destruction, which is the study and ultimately someday the real prevention of one of the worst mass catastrophes that could happen to any group of humanity, and that is genocide. So we are talking about not theory, we're talking about reality on the ground that is still ongoing today, and in so doing, we hope to introduce you more and more to this desire to not work at resolving conflicts into the future, but in fact move to a much higher plane, a plane where we will prevent conflicts from happening. The realm of the study of the worst catastrophes that can happen, which is genocide in my perspective, can, I think, lead us from just attempting to resolve some of these conflicts to actually get into this realm of preventing them. I am not an academic, where I've just moved it from PowerPoint to Keynote on Apple, so there may be some glitches which I hope we will be able to work our way through. I have asked to speak for a while, about 40-odd minutes, and then, of course, a period of questions, and asking a retired general who is now an apprentice politician to constrain oneself to only 40 minutes. Brevity is really not my strength, and so I will attempt to do what my Marine Corps colleagues taught me, and I'm going to power talk. And I might achieve what Kyle can do in power talking, but it is in my second language, so I hope it will come across in a positive sense. We're going to do an overview. We're going to do a bit of history, and this means we're going to go farther than CNN history, which is last week. we're going to go a little farther than that and move us into today and project us, I hope, into the future. For that's the aim of the exercise, is in fact ultimately the prevention of genocide into the future. And in so doing, there may be some repetition, but I hope it does open up the debate as broad as it can be in regards to who and how, when we should be engaged in this prevention of mass destruction of human beings. I think it's also significant when we look at this is whether or not we actually believe that that can happen. For if we tend to be on the beyond the pragmatic to near the cynical, we might be in the wrong business in trying to look at something so vast and has so many factors at play and so many actors that have to play in this exercise. And so you might get a tinge here of optimism, even though we are currently in this country living a sort of a period where we're really not too sure exactly where the hell we want to go in this whole realm of humanity and human security, in soft power, hard power, smart power, or any sort of axe-worthy sort of terminology, including responsibility to protect, which is rather extraordinary that an R2P acronym could be considered a bad word in our headquarters of our foreign affairs. I state this only because we have been approaching the government, and Dr. Chuck and I have met with the minister in attempting to engage the government more deliberately in the exercise of preparing for and anticipating what this country, as one of the leading middle powers of the world, could do. And it's been most difficult, to say the least. And maybe it's because this is a good testing ground for us to see whether or not we've got the right tools, whether we're actually hitting the right chords in order to bring forward something that one would consider to be a near no-brainer, and particularly with a country that has enormous potential that it hasn't used. And so Canada, as an example of other middle powers, is not a country that is shooting above its weight. We may have during World War II, when we had 1 million people in uniform, out of a possibility of 5 million men in the age of carrying weapons. But that was at that time. But interesting enough, even at that moment, even though we had 1 million people in uniform, 1/5 of the male population that is in the working age, not one Canadian general sat at any strategic body, decision body of World War II. We were tactical fodder to the exercise, and as such, we have tended to be very tactical. And genocide prevention is strategic. It is in that realm. It is not confined to a border only, to a region only. It is an engagement of humanity. And so it's in that sort of perspective that I believe countries like Canada and others are nowhere near moving to their potential to, one, respond, and two, to prevent. So the scene that, to start with, the introduction is, in good Americanese, we ain't doing enough, and we're nowhere near, I believe, grasping how we can get ahead of the curve. That is to say, that how we can wrest the initiative from those who wish to perpetrate these catastrophic exercises. For we have not been successful in doing that. We have been working extensively at recording, at analyzing, at searching for more, and interpreting, and at scribing a lot of either be international conventions as much as we can, when we're highly successful, to papers and studies and so on what happened and how it happened and where is all this coming from and for what reasons does it exist. But the actual effort, the actual innovative thinking of moving us really beyond and looking at that and looking at today, that is to say, how do we project into the future that we can actually wrest the initiative from those who might want to even think of perpetrating such an action and actually preventing it from happening? We ain't there. Responsibility to protect is an action, is a reaction instrument. And so one would hope that the first pillars of responsibility to protect will gain much more momentum and in fact move us far more, I believe, into the realm of prevention. So now that a few words, we're going to test whether all this technology, I mean, I got all kinds of technology, but I'm not saying any of this crap works, but we'll see. And so as we move around, you are going to hear multidiscipline, multidiscipline, multidiscipline throughout. And in fact, this is rather an interesting gathering that has joined us here today, is that we have people from a whole variety of disciplines, be they anthropologists, political science, from those in the actual realm of working within government, to a soldier, and to, in fact, researchers, those who are trying to identify, and some me even who have essentially survived. And so what I will be pursuing, and I believe is one of those cornerstones of how we wrest the initiative into the future, is that there's no one discipline that's going to achieve the aim. That era is gone. The era of specialists on this thing is going to sort it out cannot literally happen. There are just too many factors, too many disciplines at play, too many options for solution that any one discipline can grasp it. And so I will, if I get to those slides, be concluding that we are actually looking at a whole new generation of leadership. In fact, a leadership that is multidisciplined. A general who knows only how to fight is useless in this era, because that is the last resort that nobody really wants to go to. And so what we need is, yes, that the warrior ethic, that the ability to use disciplined force is there to protect in extremis, but there's a whole raft of other options that can be used with that use of force as a possible threat, in fact, to be able to participate in the resolution and even potentially into the prevention. So that is why, as we stumbled into this era, we have been introducing soft disciplines to what normally would be considered a pretty hard-nosed, straight, conservative organization like an officer corps. Introducing anthropology, introducing sociology, introducing philosophy, so they can actually understand the genesis of what's going on, how it's being played out, who they are, seeking the information, and ultimately assist in the solutioning before we ever have to revert to the use of kinetics, to the use of force. And that's just within the General Officer Corps and in the Officer Corps. So I'm speaking here as much to NGOs as I'm speaking to diplomats, as I'm speaking to the media, I'm speaking to the different disciplines, that you can't simply master the future. You won't be able to lead missions into the future if your grasp of those other disciplines are at best cursory. Full knowledge, comprehension, and experience in those disciplines, which brings us to the risk assessment. And this is what happens when you start mixing so much in the same person. Do you actually change the nature of the individual's ability to respond? If a general knows so much about diplomacy and has been engaged so much in the political interfacing, will that general be prepared to use force? Can that general actually give pure military advice when it's required? Well, my answer to that is that there's no more such thing as pure military advice. You're expecting that advice be integrated with the other disciplines that are going, and it's not offered as a single standalone, but in fact very consciously influenced and affected as it's moving down. This is near heresy. Near heresy, particularly to the cold warriors who are still the remnants around who would believe that a single discipline, you will not put that in risk by trying to introduce these other dimensions. I am arguing that we must create, innovate, and in fact produce a whole new generation of leadership that is multidisciplinary to be able to handle the new lexicon that we are going to be having to articulate and define into the future. When I was serving for 30-odd years in the Cold War, the lexicon was very, very disciplined within our sort of realm. It was action verbs of attack and defend and withdraw and bypass and maneuver warfare, and it was the use of force on force and escalating force and all these sort of very, very developed doctrines that come from a conceptual base of war at the time based on Clausewitz. And so we knew the framework in detail. We'd had a couple centuries at least, certainly since Westphalia, to build these forces within nation states and how they should function and so on. So it was pretty straightforward in how to apply and when that force and where it fits into that box of solutions, as the diplomat knew where they stood, and so on and so on. But as the NGO world became stronger, and the media world also, these new players started to throw a few curves at our ability to function in that isolation. But more importantly, as we stumbled into this era of conflict resolution versus classic war of nation states against nation states, we started to get a whole new raft of words, a new lexicon with nothing behind it. And so when I get the mandate to establish an atmosphere of security in a nation that had been over 100 years under colonial rule, had been over 25 years under a dictatorship, had been 3 years in a civil war, didn't have a multi-party system, is the mandate. How do you actually accelerate people through a process of this nature to achieve what I would consider should have been the last objective of establishing that country in stability, that is to say a democratic election? We might have started by trying to let the media be more open and transparent and start processes of building the different political education of the people into what it means to democracy and how they do get engaged. We didn't do that. We just went for a democratic election, created more stresses and strains, and in fact exacerbated the possibility of actually having a solution. So we did assist in precipitating catastrophic failure because we threw in the odd curve into an already difficult, if not impossible, agreement to implement. And so we're having a bit of a problem of, even when we're engaged, of discerning when the tripwire has been engaged and we are finding ourselves in a process that there is no seemingly out except the actual total use of force. And that's, I think, the sad dimension of it is that we seem to be so hesitant in bringing in this new lexicon, these new integrated solutions, is that we are sitting on that fence till ultimately the only solution that everybody's screaming about is the use of force, and in that case we don't want really to use force because we have a fear of casualties. And if you have a fear of casualties in a scenario like Syria, then you can't go in. Urban warfare is the worst possible style of warfare. You need hundreds of thousands of troops to control urban areas. And when the forces are so intermeshed within an urban area, how do you actually extricate them? And how do you actually establish the lines without putting massive amounts of force and a high risk? particularly when you have to put boots on the ground, where everybody is far more inclined to use technology and stay at the 10,000 feet. So that mandate that I got, that lexicon that all of a sudden got thrown into the equation, which is, at the time, in 1993, coming out of the Security Council, was establish an atmosphere of security. So the questions that came to mind immediately were, what does establish mean? How do you establish something in this multidimensional context with so much tension, so much friction, so many tight milestones, and so much pressure, not only internally, but from the outside, players who were fiddling into the pot? What do you do to establish? How far do you go in establishing? How much do you take over the process versus assisting it, versus monitoring it? How much do you render those who are to implement it in a secondary role as you guide them, and I'll use that word, guide them through the process? How do I establish an atmosphere of security? How do I establish it? Do I need 50,000 troops for a country? Do I need 20,000? Do I protect the nation when I'm demobilizing both armies against a possible third party or a spoiler that's appearing? And how do we respond to that? So we have an action verb of establish, but we've got nothing really behind it. There's not much of a sort of backdrop on experience of establishing to be able to say that this is how we're actually going to implement. And then the second part of that mandate, which is pretty tight, is establish an atmosphere of security. Now what is that? What is behind an atmosphere of security? Is it political stability? You certainly hope so, but we ain't got that. We're in the midst of trying to establish it. Is it a police state so that you overwhelm any possibility of anyone being able to interfere by the use of force in any way, shape, or form? Well, people didn't want to put 50 or 60,000 troops there, although they put 67 in Yugoslavia. We couldn't even get the original request for about 4,500. So it's not that way. If it's not a police state, do you disarm everyone? And can you actually monitor that possibility without spoilers coming into play? And so we have, ladies and gentlemen, stumbled into a new era with old tools. And humbly I would say they may be managing what's going on, but they're not resolving it. They're not getting ahead of it. At best, we're managing it. And so that brings me to the second of my 143 slides. It's a framework from which do we establish what we want as a sort of grand strategic backdrop. Are you in this mode of actually thinking that humanity will actually continue to thrive, or is focused on wanting to thrive? And I speak humanity because now we can speak of humanity globally. We know pretty well where everybody is, and not too far from now with the revolution of communications, we'll be able to Skype anybody in humanity. So we'll actually have a face there and know where it is and be able to talk to it and see it. So can we actually have a framework in which we believe we are going to push the envelope and continue to thrive with all those factors that are seemingly negatively at play, none the least of which are the frictions of the different elements of humanity that do rapidly degenerate into conflict and to catastrophic failure? Or are we in a mode of survival? What's the aim of how we handle the future? How are we going to survive this future from a whole raft of nuclear weapons that can be put in the hands of any wacko that's out there that's been able to buy some, through the environmental catastrophe where a question of whether or not humanity will actually be able to survive the planet? Will we actually be in a position to communion with the planet, to ensure that the increasing population will actually continue to increase, and that part of it is not going to have to disappear under catastrophic scenarios of drought or whatever, food shortages and so on, to be able to permit the stronger to survive. I would argue that everything that I have pushed and think that one must establish as the baseline of your strategic thinking into the future is that you do believe that humanity will thrive. And that's where you're pushing. And that you're not simply in the survival mode, because that means how do we handle mostly the current and try to avoid the future, and not how do we actually live with this present, learn from it, and establish, or better yet, shape that future, anticipate that future, which I believe is that getting ahead of those frictions that can in fact degenerate into conflict and catastrophic failure, and wrest the initiative from them from so doing. And so with that, I believe that it is a time where maybe the odd genius might be helpful, and the presence of such people are certainly no guarantee of this time frame. And I put this up not flippantly, because I believe that this is what we're sort of seeking. We want those answers that's up there, but in so doing, are we able to achieve them? And so, do we actually have that ability to bring about these clear ideas and precise solutions to us? Or are those frictions always going to be with a solution coming from conflict? Or can we actually think of an era where we won't actually turn to conflict? Now, I would argue that I'm allowed putting this up here now because I stated earlier on, we're in an era of the political elites managing the problems. We're not in an era where the political elites have been able to figure out what they've stumbled into since the end of the Cold War particularly, and have tried to get ahead of the game. And I would argue even that without moving from politician to statesman or statesperson, we won't potentially achieve that. We won't get that leadership, because to be a statesman means enormous flexibility, means humility, it means adaptability, and means taking risks. And we are surrounded by politicians who are pragmatic and risk avoidance, who are dominated by self-interest and very, very narrowly, and are very tactical and near-term. What's tomorrow morning's New York Times article? And so we're at a real disconnect into the tools that are available in the framework of trying to move forward. And as so doing, just makes it much more difficult. I spoke a few moments ago about humanity. This Polish journalist wrote this book a few years ago, and it's always a favorite when I go to universities. I put it up because it's only got 97 pages in it. Then I tell them there's no pictures, and then I see a certainly downturn. In this, it's an interesting argument where he says for 400 years the Caucasian European was a center and everybody else was the other, and functioned under that premise. Everyone else is the other, we are it. Well, that has taken a massive turn for a change in this era because of the ability of people to travel, because of the communications, because of education, the exchanges. We are now in a world where everybody is the other of everybody else. There is no more sort of this and the rest. Everyone is at the same plateau. We are all the other of the other. And this is revolutionary, because it means that we're all equal. It means that we are all humans equal. And I think that that argument has got to be a reference as we look into that future, because the past simply hasn't necessarily met that criteria. I like using Americans, particularly philosophers like him, because And it's a simple statement. But that statement said 60 years ago doesn't have anywhere near the value of what it means today. Today, we are in an era where we are in an exponential change, which I would even call revolutions. And there is that non-predictability that's out there that continues to dumbfound us and catch us by surprise. We are continuously reacting to so many changes. And although the future, 20, 30 years ago, meant that you had sort of an apprenticeship phase as you sort of looked at things in your career 20 years down the road, you know where you're at. Well, today the future is 5 years down the road. It's 4 or 6 years down the road in a whole variety of disciplines. And so with that shifting sand, there is no more that warm fuzzy feeling that we've got this thing aced. We've actually, we sorted this one out. I would argue that anyone who believes that is in fact in the wrong era. That we are, in fact, in that revolutionary time frame where there is a requirement to act accordingly. And rapidly, these are a few of the revolutions that are just starting. None of these has achieved steady state. They're just starting. And I put Google there just to pique your interest in what happens if Google goes rogue. I mean, who's got the hand on Google? And in fact, to what extent does Google really respond to what it says is security when we recently just heard what's happening in the States between Google, Yahoo, and all the rest of them with the American government and national intelligence services. So what happens if it does decide to go rogue? And what is the tool that's going to replace Google? And how much are we influencing that? We leading? Or are we simply going to be using tools that technicians have built that ultimately will affect us? And so, with that sort of framework, it is very difficult, in fact, to move if you do not take as a basic premise that there is no more status quo. The nation state is no more a status quo. R2P has proven that. It's actually articulated that a nation state, that sovereignty is no more an absolute. We can go in. The criteria are there for us to go in, whether you like us or not. And so, in that premise, there is no time for us to be able to feel that we've actually found solutions. We're just still working on job training. We are sort of ad hocing. We are even, I would argue, sort of crisis managing this era and not necessarily getting ahead of it. And the fundamental argument behind that is that the status quo, as we see it, from nation states to international bodies and so on, the status quo is not sustainable. You just cannot sustain it. There are too many factors at play that's starting to pull it apart and starting to create pressures to render it less and less effective, and ergo, what's replacing it? What's getting ahead of it? And unless we're on that curve going up here and we want to stay there, we're not going to stay here, we're going down there. And that delta will continue to throw us into the catastrophic failures that we have seen over the last couple decades. And so rapidly, if I may, I do believe that the overarching option is, in fact, that we have to establish that communion and that we are in that new world order that has significantly changed from the past. And so that old stuff, as I said, I do a bit of history, that old stuff of our colleagues of the past, Eurocentric security, with everybody else being on the sidelines, is over. I mean, that's not coming back. Massive armies against massive armies, I don't see it coming back for at least decades and decades and decades. No matter how many troops the Chinese can put in the field, no matter how many troops the Indians can put in the field, no matter how many troops we can, or what technology we can throw at it, we will not see in the future that type of methodology in resolving internal nation-state problems and by the by, regional problems. And so we need a much more sophisticated entity that's out there that can, in fact, go beyond that. Remembering that and in 2003 was only phase one. Phase two was, what do you do once you beat that army? And how do you handle the nation, the reconciliation and rebuilding of the nation? And who's engaged in it? And how do you provide the protection of it? So I would argue that it's very timely that we continue to pursue the higher plane problem of genocide and prevention of mass atrocities, because there is so much material there that can lead to it. And in this era, I believe we have, not like George Bush Sr. said, moved into a new world order, we've moved into a new world disorder, only because we haven't grasped exactly what all the parameters are out there, and we keep getting caught off guard and caught by so doing. So I think that the era of massive abuses of human rights, of mass displacements of human beings, of concentration against their will of peoples in the millions and millions, is there and can continue to appear. And that we are not prepared to be able to respond to it because we have not been able to comprehend what actually is those tripwires ultimately that lends us to the catastrophic failure ultimately that we are seeing. And so we are looking, I hope, to that prevention mode, let alone trying to resolve the current response to these. And I just put these up here rapidly because they are a sign of that changing scenario. And that changing scenario has some factors in there, and the first one is that the civilian population is both the instrument of war and the prize. They are both. And the youths are particularly the ones who are paying that price of being caught in both sides. People want millions of people on their side so that they can negotiate. At the same time, people are trying to move millions out and destroy them to, in fact, sustain their power base. Rwanda's power base came from the fact that if they could eliminate the Tutsis, they then would not have to share power. It was an easy, identifiable target that they established and went after it. And as such, achieved a certain level of success in attempting to do it. We have, of course, been traumatized in this time frame, and that's a fair assessment that we should not negate. When the world power in its psyche has been affected, everybody else is going to pay that price. And in so doing, how do we actually come back from it is still up in the air. We are moving into an era where the overriding factors are not necessarily political in the sense of nation states to nation states, of course, but have pan-global consequences and aims. And none the least of which is the continued pursuit of resources to sustain and to permit others to join in to the advancement of humanity. And as such, we are selecting our engagements not based on humanity, but too often based on the resources, the value of what might be our interest in that region, and particularly resource interest for the northern countries in order to sustain what they're doing. And more we will see the BRIC being pushed into that same exercise as they go after illicit, illegal, and abusive resources that we need and that we will use force to get. So the nature of the beast, as I've been describing, where it is no more force on force, it is very civilian oriented on all sides, and it is not easy to anticipate, has been exacerbated by the fact that whatever we see out there as belligerents or belligerent in many of these conflicts is an entity that is prepared to function totally outside any of the rules of the game. And so, if the other side is playing by none of the rules that we know, do we sustain our rules to be able to not only provide our own protection, let alone protect others, but even get ahead of the game? And we've seen that we have reacted in a very panic mode over the last decade in particular, and still have that there by fiddling with civil liberties, the Patriot Act and so on, fiddling with international conventions permitting torture, fiddling with, with human rights by permitting torture, and international conventions by Guantanamo Bay being created. We've actually, instead of trying to bring a new system in to provide that level of security, we've actually gone down the road of the guys, the bad guys. And the question is how far down that road do we go to protect ourselves and be able to stop? And then go back to what we initially were trying to do. Create these liberal states and create that freedom and that human rights respect that we've fought for so many years. Is there another way than actually simply using those methods that they are, but to a varying degree to achieve our aim? And this is only a sort of repetition. How much time have I got, Frank? Yeah, good. And I need time for questions. So, yeah, I think I'm going to move more rapidly, if I can, through these slides, only to bring out a few more points, if I may. I would argue that as we stumbled into this era, we are continuously stumbling into not solutions, but dilemmas. And the dilemmas are not necessarily getting the analysis to provide the solutions we're going over. And so we are seeing more and more ethical, moral, and legal dilemmas presenting themselves as we attempt to provide our security in one sense, and maybe be able to move some innovative concepts like responsibility to protect or will to intervene in a fashion that is still consistent with our conventions and so on that we've established over the past. And so how do we handle these legal, moral, and ethical dilemmas? How do you handle those drones? How do you handle killing your own by drones in foreign lands who have gone rogue on you? And there are so many other of these new dimensions that are coming in, not just because of the weaponry, it's because of the application of the weaponry, the application of the force, and what surrounds it in the guise of our security that is creating these dilemmas, and the old tools still being around but being upgraded. I mean, we had drones in the 70s. We had a company right here in Montreal that was producing drones, Canadair. I was the director of Army requirements in the late 80s, and in fact, I had an investment of close to 20 million on a drone being built there. So this is not new, it's just the fact that they're actually being used and we know about them. And so it's not that all this is sort of revolutionary in that sense, it's just what's revolutionary is how we're applying it, is how the politics are being used. The judicial system, our analysis of the conventions and of the rule of law international, and how we are, in fact, pushing the envelope globally for our security. And certainly, you will all remember the Reagan Star Wars exercise and how that created an enormous uproar. Well, we're even still trying to figure out missile defense system in this country, and whether we want to participate in that. And should we, because there are some perceived rogue countries out there that are building a capacity to come at us. So, I mean, at the grand strategic level, we're still even trying to figure it out, let alone nuclear disarmament not particularly being effective, even though there's an American president that is attempting to move that. So, all this stuff just doesn't work. And it's still out there being fiddled with. And as such, I would argue that we are not in an ability in the field even to respond to all this. That I would argue that these dilemmas are curtailing our ability to respond. It was one thing to have a mandate that had rules of engagement this wide. But it is another thing when it's interpreted by the capabilities you got on the ground to actually apply them and the political risk that your nation is prepared to live with in its application. And so we end up in this sort of dilemma, even when we are using force, in regards to what extent we can, and what we'll be held accountable for in the possible use of force in preventing, let alone, in conflict resolution, let alone in prevention. The rules of engagement that I had for Rwanda, when you read the mandate, was about that wide. But the actual ability to apply them and the willingness by nations to apply them gave me that much. And so, who's covering that other area in order to move us back to even the mandates as ill-defined as are, would have given me to be able to achieve the aim. And so, that complexity is, of course, of this new era. And mandates and missions are no more classic as they've been, and those who dream for them are in the wrong era. Ambiguity and complexity are the norm. And I wonder if this is going to go back. Oh, geez. I made a mistake here. And I don't want to go through all that again. Excuse me. And so, missions, mandates, not classic, ambiguity and complexity are, of course, the norms now, and that's the way, and these dilemmas are continuing to abound. That's the environment in which we're functioning. In the field and back home when they're trying to figure out what to say, what to do, and how to react. This does not give a warm, fuzzy feeling to politicians to want to engage. And without that, their engagement then is risk-averse, tenuous, late, and often far too low scale to make any real influence on the situation. And so I think that will move by essentially bringing out a quandary of the past that's still ongoing today to leave questions of the future. We did not react to a flagrant genocide, even though we reacted massively to another. Why did we go into Yugoslavia with such an extraordinary scale of capability, and why at the same time we pulled out nearly every vestige of capability that we had in another one, and where there were more people killed, injured, internally displaced, refugeed, and raped in 100 days than the 6 years of the Yugoslavian campaign. What were those decisions? What were those factors that ultimately brought those decisions about? And the responses on the ground were, there's nothing here in Rwanda. There's no resources, it's not a strategic country, we don't really know them that well, and they're not a security threat. And by the by, the only thing that are here are human beings, and there's too many of them anyways. And so, this is the era we're in. Is the human being in the list of factors is the lowest denominator still. And if that's the case, how do you bring it up to the higher plane where we want to be engaged in regards to ultimately the prevention of mass catastrophes and destruction? And so I think there are a couple tools out there, and I go rapidly. The first one is the media. There's Professor Thompson will talk about that. This cannot permit us to hide, in as much as information will come, often not enough, but it will come. And so it's available, and it wants to be even more available, and it wants to be conscious, although it's limited because of resources. And I'll let Professor Thompson talk about his book and the angle of this dimension to genocide prevention mass atrocities. The other one where I put a lot of stock in is this gang. And this is only, about 30 out of 15, 20,000 and counting that exist in the world today, covering every dimension of humanity. And I won't negate that there are a couple fringe wackos that you got to keep an eye on, but the general thematics of the NGO world is there. They're there before, they're there during, and they're there after. They are the eyes and ears of humanity. They are the voice of humanity. And I would argue that they will influence public opinion and policy as they coalesce and move away from the sort of anecdotal structures that they are built on to a far more rigorous metrics capability that will, in fact, provide you that hard information in order to not just get good laws like we've seen coming out of the optional protocol on child rights for child soldiers and so on, but actually get countries to not only sign up to them, but actually want to put them into implementation, actually put them into law in their own countries. That's a step that in many countries has not happened. This country also. We signed it in the year 2000, and I'm introducing legislation next winter on trying us to implement what we signed up into law. And so these are, to me, the tools of significant opportunity for the future, and how to work with them is, to me, one of the great assets of our time. Add to that the revolution in communications, and you've got yourself a whole new element in the solutioning, in the prevention, because you will know, you will feel, you will hear, and you will see what's happening out there between the media and the NGO world. And so we have, in my opinion, 3 options for the future, and I've got a bunch of other slides, including the will to intervene, but I'm going to leave that to you, Professor Chalk, and so on. I'm going to end with these 3 to sort of bring you back full circle to the first slide, or sorry, the second slide that spoke of whether you believe humanity is going to thrive or survive. You can either continue to evolve in a context of survival, that is, we'll survive here. Canadians who are in the crowd are particularly privileged because nobody knows we're here. Just look at an American weatherman's map, and what do you see north of the United States? You see nothing. They don't even have the decency to write Canada across all that, and they give us a hard time when a cold Arctic blast comes south. So when summer comes and we watch all those tornadoes down there, we sort of sit and say, maybe that Arctic blast wasn't that bad. However, so we have, in fact, created a country. This country has been created with a context that we won't fight here, that we don't have to worry here. We'll go somewhere else, which we've done historically, but we won't have to fight here. And so, as I commended this whole region of the province of Quebec, my headquarters was just up the street here in 1995, the Cree, First Nations, there's 1 million First Nation Aboriginals in this country. The Cree decided that they were going to fight Hydro-Quebec, who wanted to put more of the province underwater, more of their land underwater, for hydro that we're selling to the United States, the United States. So they were preparing to conduct some pretty subversive operation. I did an assessment of our whole hydro capability. A platoon of dummies could have stopped all that. We didn't even have octogenarian World War II veterans standing guard on this stuff. So we are, in some cases, in a smug scenario that, yeah, we'll have to fight there. It won't come here. It ain't going to come here. And I would argue that that, in this era, is got to be the greatest fallacy of all. It is not only coming, it's already here. And it can be here not only from disenfranchised youth from the Aboriginal community internally and creating subversive capabilities, but it's here also by diasporans who are connected and their youth are connected. And listen, the diaspora connection is not something foreign. It shouldn't be, because the bulk of the RPF troops were young people who were diasporas, who came back through Uganda and Burundi and retrained and rejoined with their families, funded by outside, and actually exercised their fighting ability to fight that dictatorship. So, I mean, it's here. So the first option shouldn't be even considered, because that is of a different era. The second one is one of my favorites, because that was the immediate reaction after 9/11. That is to say, the next day on 12, when we got these phone calls from the South saying, you know, you guys are sick up there, we're a little concerned. So what we're going to do is we're going to build Fortress North America. We're just going to close down the place, and nobody with a black mustache is going to be allowed in. And it'll go downhill from there. And so the way to solve our problem, not humanity, our problem, is to isolate ourselves and build actually that sort of context of a wall and live in that fortress and put everything possible to turn us into ultimately police states, because that would be the only way that you'd be able hopefully to establish that. So I don't think option 2 is one that we see as the advancement of humanity and nor of ultimately our ability to continue to thrive. We'd be locked into that goddamn fortress. So the third one is where I believe we gotta go. We have to go where the rage is continuing to be sustained. And although we've seen it from one part of the population, as an example from extremist Muslim dimensions, there is nothing that prevents, the 600 to 700 million sub-Saharan black Africans of doing exactly the same thing. There is nothing that prevents South Americans disenfranchised from wanting to coalesce to do it, because the tools are there now. The ability to coalesce now exists. And that's the great factor. In this country, the Aboriginal people are on 658 locations across the country. They've never been able to coalesce. Now with communications and better education, they can't coalesce. If they can't coalesce, they'll lock this country down. And so this is a major factor in what I would argue is the sense of urgency, and I'll end with this. We are not in an exercise that we hope to solve in 30, 40 years. We must have a sense of urgency in regards to going to the source of the rage, be it massive poverty, be it abuse of power, be it human rights. Use those parameters, be it resources, be it survival. We didn't sign, in fact, till very recently, the Treaty on Water, the human right to water. Why? Because we didn't want to disadvantage ourselves when we were going to negotiate selling all our water to the Americans or throwing it into deserts to make, raisins or whatever the hell they're doing. So, or golf courses. So, no, we are in an era that I believe requires that sense of urgency, and I'm not convinced that we have it. And the sense of urgency is not trying to build our fortresses here. The sense of urgency is going to attenuate the rage there, and ultimately those frictions not fall into conflict, but actually we participate in preventing them. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have Senator Dallaire will take questions from the audience until about for another 20-25 minutes, so 11:15. So I ask you to perhaps line up at the microphone for those of you who want to pose a question so we can all hear you clearly. Thank you. Don't be shy.
If you don't, I'm going to throw the 100 other slides at you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Laszlo Sarkanian from the University of Western Ontario, excuse me, from London, Ontario, Canada. I've had the distinct pleasure of being supervised. I'm a PhD student and I'm being supervised by a member of the Canadian military as well. And when I chose my dissertation topic, his words to me were, there are 10 ways to take a hill, pick one. So essentially it goes down to decision making, and you mentioned indecision in the beginning, in the context of risk aversion. Now, how do we go from not wanting to take a risk to essentially taking risks and going out there and essentially trying to go at the root of the rage? That's my question, number one. Question number two is about moral dilemmas, right? So you mentioned we have a number of moral dilemmas when we essentially address conflicts on a global scale. But I'm wondering if in these contexts, are the individuals that we're dealing with, do they have these similar moral dilemmas? Because I think the short answer for me is, well, perhaps not. We are dealing with a number of issues, and you've dealt with them yourself. But when we are dealing with the individuals on the ground or groups on the ground, the moral dilemmas, the same ones that we're dealing with, are just not there anymore. Thank you so much.
I'm an apprentice politician in the upper house, the Senate, and watched closely by being the deputy chair of the Defense Committee, on the Anti-Terrorism Committee, also on the Veterans Committee, and I've been on the Human Rights Committee and the Aboriginal Peoples Committee. And watching how the decision processes are evolving through caucuses, because the Senate, although we are not engaged in the decision making, because that's the House of Commons, but we are engaged in the exchange with the members of the House of Commons through the political party caucuses. And watching how the political dimension, which has the executive there as the legislative, so they're both there. So you got the cabinet, but you also got the legislators there, and how one is trying to influence the other. As we're seeing, in my opinion, certainly in countries like ours here, is that there's a disconnect between the legislative and the executive. And that the executive is, with all its concentrated power and all its tools and assets through the public servants and so on, are conducting a risk assessment in a near isolation to what the legislative, which is the people, are actually telling them to do. So the risk assessment of that body politic up there is gauged by the information they're getting and that isolation that they are functioning from. As an example, we have over decades now built more and more the concept of risk averse. The polite word is risk assessment, but it's really risk averse. So like the polite word for budget cuts is transformation. So same thing. So we end up with this whole structure behind the executive that is risk averse. And it has influenced the political elite in that same sense. What is the risk? What engagement? Imagine if they actually decide to go into a country before something happens. And nothing happens. What's the first question that's asked? Why did we go in there in the first place? Why did we waste all those resources? Why did we take the risk even? It didn't happen. Or if you went in and the thing went awry, then the next question is, well, you guys exacerbated it. You probably aided and abetted. You probably facilitated this thing. So prevention is a super high risk exercise for that pragmatic, tactical, short-term political elite that we have that is in a risk-averse mode. And what's the counter to that? Well, the counter to that is, one, by population engagement, which I believe doesn't exist. We don't have population. We got media engagement. We got pundits who tell us what to think, but we don't have population engagement. in telling the politicians what we want to do. And the gang who are the most going to be influenced by this are the gang between 18 and 25, and they're not even in the exercise to start with, generally speaking. Although I believe that this new generation, which I call Generation Without Borders, because they're already global and worldwide, I think they are going to maybe change that. But essentially, that for this country, that 2.8 million votes that never got used could actually change the nature of politics in this country in one election. And they don't coalesce. Should they coalesce, they could do that. And so the balance of power is in a group that is going to be significantly influenced. They're the ones who cross the pond and have to fight. They're the ones who are in the field with the NGOs. They're the one in the development field, getting their boots dirty. They're the ones at most risk, yet they're not participating in what the ultimate policy frameworks are, nor what ultimately we want to commit ourselves to. So non-engagement, non-activism. That's why the executive is isolated and getting away with that sort of risk averse. And I think that's terrible, a terrible indictment to our democracies, is that non-engagement, that non-activism side. The second part of that, however, is what information is getting to them to give them a sense that they can override these natural tendencies that have been inculcated in them. Not only the risk averse, but also the pragmatism, the overarching pragmatism, the low-level thinking of problematics, and of course the near-term objectives that they're always thinking. What's coming at them that's giving them a much more fuzzy feeling? I put the genius slide up there, but only put that there to say that who's getting that stuff to them? Who's providing? Well, there's got to be, in my opinion, a leadership strata in the countries that are not engaged. Let me give you an example to do exactly what I'm saying. I went to a supper at the probably posh private club in Canada, the Toronto Club. Very, very proper place. Only high rollers in there. And I was invited to supper where they had about a dozen or so of these gentlemen and ladies around the table, and you get invited to supper, but you don't eat because they ask you questions all the time, and they eat, and you just watch your lovely sauce béarnaise get cold and so on. So they were bombarding me with questions on the conflict resolution, on a variety of these subjects, and R2P, and so on. And seeking, from me, what that magical framework for them to comprehend so that they can see what the nation is doing and what it should do. And I turned it on them and I said, the reason why I don't have the answer, nor does the necessary political elite, is because you guys are not being involved. Worse, you're not even thinking of being involved. The business world, the leadership strata of the nation, is not engaged. When was the last time that these people actually took on some of these significant dimensions of the future of policy of the country and actually got engaged in the exercise? Overtly. And I got no problems, a bit of underneath stuff going too. They don't. They don't. And so I turned them right on their own petard, and it was extraordinary. Their eyeballs were huge because they had never realized that they can be actually taking on a significant role because they've got all the connections. They've got all the power behind them. They've got the credibility. But they just don't engage. They didn't see it as their fight. So I think that's the second aspect in regards to risk, is that there's a strata of leadership in our nations that are just not engaged. And they are not holding accountable the seniors, nor bringing forward, nor financing through think tanks and so on, those who can bring intellectual rigor to some of this stuff and bring out solutions that might be articulated by them to the political elites. So that's just two. The moral dilemmas. Now, people argue that human rights is a Western philosophy, and these moral dilemmas are often created by our reference, our values and our sort of ethical frameworks and beliefs, and so we're creating these things that are not necessarily pan-world, global humanity. I would argue that that's wrong, because when you see populations and nations getting education, I'm not talking about religious-based education. I'm talking about education that can be instruction, that can be within the framework, it can be, of their social structure, but the education, objective education, where they are being given that intellectual rigor to figure out what the problems are and to bring solutions. The more and more that education comes forward, the less and less that argument of Western philosophies being imposed on them stands. And in fact, it's a more natural framework of human right, of equality, of changing some of the cultural frameworks, changing the traditions that are in fact not being progressive. I think the other side of that, in the moral dilemmas, because things have permitted to go so catastrophic, is that there's a group that's not been empowered to influence what is happening on the ground. And that is the empowerment of women. I think we've been able to see such catastrophic failure going because there's a whole group of these populations who have never been engaged to sort of temper, influence, change, participate in the reconciliation, let alone the prevention and building of nations in the future. I think just like, and the example I use is right within my own background. In 1982, this country had a human rights charter that came in, and it said women are to be employed equally as men throughout the country. So the first thing we in the Army, and the other forces, but the Army did, we said it doesn't apply to us, because we're a male-dominated bonding capability, and women simply will be so disruptive they will not be able to handle the fundamental premise that it is through the cohesion of your units that you got power, strength, that you're fighting force. And we fought that for 9 years, right up to the Supreme Court. We're supposed to defend these laws, but we fought it. And then all of a sudden, in 1991, the Supreme Court said, no, you will apply it, except for submarines, and that's been changed. And so, what did we do? The generals of the time simply said, make it happen. Well, what do you mean, make it happen? How do we integrate them? How do we assimilate them? How do we adapt to this situation? How do we introduce them? So, what I'm getting at is that far more deeper than that, the whole leadership philosophy of the military was male-dominated. It was male-dominated leadership philosophy. This is how we assess. The introduction of women has finally started to be studied, of women in command position and so on, and they are changing that male-dominated philosophy to a different leadership philosophy, more flexible, and in fact more adaptable, and have proven to be highly effective even in the combat roles. We got battalion commanders now that are women. The first woman combat soldier was killed in Afghanistan in 2006. She was Canadian, and she was calling down fire to protect the whole company of infantry, and she had to expose herself to call down that fire, and she was killed doing it. First one. So it's quite fundamental to bring in these changes. And so I only say that you can attenuate those dilemmas by these evolutionary processes. Empowerment of women and education are the pillars of it. And also the fact that we'll probably need a century to do it. But that's okay. What's wrong with that? We've been in Cyprus for 60 years and they're not killing each other, and someday they might sort it out, but it's going along. So what's wrong with a century if we can actually pull that together? And so building purely on short term to respond to this will not be the answer. It is attrition and it is long-term continued efforts that we will actually achieve this ability to respond. And that's my short answer. Thank you.
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Angela Rayburn. I'm from the Stanley Foundation in Iowa. Something you said that I find kind of fascinating about the old world order and about the Caucasian European being the dominant for hundreds of years. So now we have the new order of countries rising. What's your sense of where they're going to go? Are we exchanging one set of human rights violating, oppressing nations for a new set? In terms of, are these new countries that's going to rise in this new world order, are they just wanting a piece of the world's pie, or are they going to be prepared to address some of the moral dilemmas that you're talking about? I guess I'm curious about that, because if you're born in a small little island in the Caribbean colonized by the Brits, you're sort of not so important, right? You're sort of just there waiting for everybody above you to run amok and do whatever they do. And I was just wondering, given where we were colonized by the Brits and everything, and now who's coming? The Chinese, maybe the Indians? What do we have to look forward to? Thank you.
Your question resonates because I have a bit of a problem with Brits too, historically, being a French Canadian. And imagine what you are going after as you're describing. In this country, the battle to establish the British regime over the French regime happened in 1759. It was in 1968 that the legislation was finally brought in to make both languages equal and opportunities equal, and we would become a bilingual country. And after that, we've been at it for 40 years, and we still get the English version, and then at the bottom it says French text later. So imagine where we're going, even after what should be a quite modern thinking society and free will. And that's where I think two things. One, the regional capabilities, I believe, have got to and will be coming more to the fore than purely the nation states. And I think there's going to be an attrition of the nation state hold on itself and its ability to restrain and to create the frictions by not only the global commercial scenario, but the whole revolution of communications that has no borders, and the introduction more and more of more deliberate NGOs who are engaged in not just the social rights side, but in fact on the whole industrial structures, like ethical oil and all these kinds of things. And so I think that we're going to be seeing nations caught up in quandaries of what to do, because these exterior factors are actually going to be dictating to them. And I think that's going to be the salvation to it, is that more and more of that outside and linking happens, less and less the nation state will be able to restrain, and more for it to survive has got to be adapted. Not to say it's going to disappear necessarily. I gave the conference at the Westphalia in Munster at the annual conference there, and we were there, and argued that nation state is being attrited. Well, it didn't go well too bad, but I believe it is, and I believe that is going to give us more of that ability to prevent these internal frictions from going catastrophic, and nations continue to be perceived as sovereign. It's going to be more humanity, and I think R2P is a revolution. it was the only one of 101 recommendations that Kofi Annan tried to get passed in 2005. But I think it's a revolution because, to me, it has taken on Westphalia and said, sovereignty is no more an absolute. And that's a revolution, if there's any. And that's maybe why they're so afraid to use it. Or use some of it and not use the term because they're not too sure exactly how to operationalize it, and that's going to be more of the conference that you'll be in. So we're entreating that entity that's going to continue to create frictions. In fact, I believe there are these other factors are going to be able to attenuate it. And again, not in our lifetime, but we want to achieve it because you're building a momentum more and more based on human rights and the engagement of youth and the technologies that are being applied. Thank you very much. I think I'll take it from there.
General Dallaire, on behalf of everyone at MIGS, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. So everyone, we're just going to take a short 15-minute coffee break now before we move into our first session, the panel on international law and the Genocide Convention. So please take advantage of the time to get off from your seats and meet with each other. Thank you.